My name is Clara Vance. I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my husband of 7 years kissed my forehead at the Santorini airport, told me a sudden corporate crisis required him to stay behind in Europe, and put me on a flight back to New York alone. 20 minutes after he walked away to his supposed connecting flight to London, a stranger in the airport cafe handed me a sleek, black smartphone my husband had left on the counter. It was a phone I had never seen before, and the messages flashing on its locked screen were about to detonate every single truth I thought I knew about my marriage, my finances, and the man I had spent my entire adult life building an empire for. Before I get into exactly what was on that screen, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you've ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal felt like the ground disappearing beneath your feet. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are as you hear this, because isolation is exactly what manipulators bank on, and I want to know I'm not alone. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The dynamic of my marriage didn't break in Greece. It was designed to be broken from the start. I just didn't have the clarity to see the architecture of my own prison. Mark Vance was 36, the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, a boutique commercial real estate and tech integration firm that had recently been valued at just over $85 million. He wore bespoke Italian suits, spoke in boardrooms with the aggressive charisma of a megachurch pastor, and possessed the kind of magnetic arrogance that made people want to hand him their money. Everything about Mark's life looked expensive, curated, and entirely self-made. But it wasn't self-made. I made it. We met when I was 25. I was a junior architect at a prestigious Manhattan firm, working 80-hour weeks and slowly building a reputation for designing sustainable, tech-integrated commercial spaces. Mark was a mid-level project manager with massive ambitions and zero capital. When his father died, he left Mark nothing but a tarnished family name and a mountain of expectations. The Vances were Connecticut old money who had quietly gone broke 2 generations ago, a fact my mother-in-law, Eleanor, masked by treating everyone around her like the hired help. When Mark pitched me his idea for a new kind of development firm, I believed in him. I believed in his vision, and more importantly, I believed in us. When we got married, I did the thing every financial advisor tells you never to do. I cashed out a $350,000 trust fund. My late grandfather had left me the only safety net I had in the world, and handed it to Mark as the seed money for Vance Innovations. I didn't stop there. I quit my job. I drafted the architectural blueprints for our first 3 flagship properties for free. I designed the branding. I sat in our cramped 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, eating instant ramen, while Mark took investors out for $1,000 steak dinners, telling me it was all necessary overhead. "We are building this together, Clara," he used to tell me, holding my hands across our cheap IKEA table. "You're my secret weapon. Everything I do is for us." I was 26. I loved him. I believed him. As the company grew, my role shrank. Once Vance Innovations secured its first major round of venture capital, Mark hired a glossy, corporate architectural team. My blueprints were handed over to men who charged $500 an hour to modify my original concepts. When I asked Mark about taking an official role as creative director, he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Clara, the board wants to see seasoned executives with global portfolios. You're incredibly talented, but it just wouldn't look professional to put my wife on the executive team. People would call it nepotism." Nepotism. For the company I bought and the buildings I designed. Over the next 7 years, I was systematically erased from the narrative of my own creation. Mark became the visionary genius profiled in business magazines. I became the supportive, quiet wife who hosted dinner parties in our $4 million Tribeca loft. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, thrived in this new dynamic. At Thanksgiving dinners and charity galas, she would introduce me with the kind of condescension that leaves a bruise. "This is Clara," Eleanor would say, adjusting her vintage pearls. "She's been such a patient little helper to Mark. It's so nice she doesn't have to worry about a career anymore and can just focus on decorating the loft." Mark never corrected her. He would just smile, wrap an arm around my waist and say, "She keeps me grounded." I wasn't grounded. I was buried. By the summer of 2024, the distance between us had grown into a chasm. Mark was traveling constantly. London, Dubai, Miami. He was always on his phone, always stressed, always shutting the office door when I walked by. When I suggested couples counseling, he laughed and said he was just finalizing the biggest merger of his career. "Once this deal closes," he promised, "we'll take a real vacation, just the 2 of us. Santorini, like we always talked about." That was the bait, and I took it. The 12th of September 2024. The Santorini trip was supposed to be our 7th anniversary redemption. For 4 days, we stayed in a cliffside villa in Oia that cost $3,500 a night. The Aegean Sea stretched out below us like a sheet of crushed sapphires, but Mark wasn't really there. He spent hours pacing the infinity pool on his phone, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. He barely touched his wine at dinner. He looked at me the way you look at a flight delay, an annoying obstacle standing between you and where you actually want to be. On the morning of the 5th day, he burst into the bedroom while I was packing my beach bag. His face was a mask of calculated panic. "Clara, I'm so sorry," he said, already tossing his dress shirts into his leather duffel. "The London merger is falling apart. The investors are pulling out. I have to fly to Heathrow immediately, or we lose everything." I sat on the edge of the bed, the Grecian sun pouring through the white shutters. "Mark, we have 3 days left. Can't your COO handle it? Are you serious right now?" His voice snapped, sharp and cruel. "This is a $90 million deal, Clara. This isn't one of your little Pinterest projects. I have to go. I already booked you a flight back to JFK. The car is waiting." 2 hours later, we were standing in the small, chaotic terminal of the Santorini airport. Mark checked his Rolex, kissed my forehead with cold, practiced precision, and said, "I'll make it up to you. I promise. Call you when I land." He turned and walked toward the international departure gates. I stood there, feeling foolish, feeling small, holding my boarding pass for a 12-hour journey home alone. My flight wasn't boarding for another hour, so I sat at a small cafe near the gates, ordered a double espresso, and stared blankly at the runway. That's when a barista, a young Greek man with an apron covered in coffee grounds, tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me, miss?" He held out a sleek, black iPhone. "Your husband. He left this on the sugar counter when he paid for his water." I frowned, taking the device. "Thank you, but my husband has his phone, a silver one. He was just using it." The barista shrugged. I saw it fall from his jacket pocket when he reached for his wallet. I tried to shout, but he walked too fast. I looked down at the device in my hands. It was a matte black iPhone 15. No case, completely sterile. I pressed the side button. The lock screen illuminated. It wasn't a picture of us, or a default Apple background. It was a photo of a woman's hand resting on a steering wheel, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I specifically remembered Mark buying 3 months ago. When I saw the credit card charge, he had told me it was a retirement gift for his outgoing chief financial officer. The screen was locked, but a notification banner sat glowing in the center of the glass. "Chloe, flight lands at 4 p.m. Can't wait for our villa week, baby. Did you get rid of the ball and chain?" My blood turned to ice. The airport noise around me, the announcements in Greek, the rolling suitcases, the chatter of tourists faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. I swiped up to unlock it. A passcode screen appeared. 6 digits. I didn't even have to think. For a man as arrogant as Mark, passwords weren't security. They were monuments to his own ego. I typed in the date. The venture capitalist signed the paperwork to fund Vance Innovations, the deal I had made possible with my inheritance. 081419. The phone unlocked. I opened the messaging app, and the floor of my entire reality simply gave way. There wasn't just a message. There were 3 years of messages. Chloe wasn't a fling. Chloe was a 26-year-old marketing executive who lived in a luxury condo in Chelsea, a condo Mark was paying for. As I scrolled through the thread, my breath hitching in my throat, I found photos of vacations to Aspen, weekend trips to Paris, and a recent picture of a baby ultrasound. But the betrayal of the affair was only the surface. It was the message immediately below the ultrasound photo that stopped my heart completely. "Mark, the lawyer finalized the asset transfer documents this morning. Once the Cayman Shell company is funded next week, she gets absolutely nothing in the divorce. Just play the supportive girlfriend a little longer, baby. By November, Vance Innovations is entirely mine, and Clara is out on the street." I sat frozen in the Santorini airport, staring at the digital proof of my own execution. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to destroy me. He was going to take the company I funded, the wealth I helped build, and leave me with nothing but the memory of my own blind loyalty. He had left me at the airport not because of a corporate crisis in London, but because Chloe was landing in Santorini at 4 p.m. He was going to spend the next 3 days in the $3,500 a night villa I had packed for, with the woman he was replacing me with, celebrating the theft of my entire life. A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and stinging, dropping onto the glass screen of the black phone. I wiped it away. And then, something deep inside my chest, a quiet, dormant thing that had been suppressed for 7 years of boardrooms, condescending mother-in-laws, and gaslighting, snapped awake. I didn't call him. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I opened my laptop, connected to the airport Wi-Fi, and started doing what I do best. I started looking at the architecture of the problem. They say grief has 5 stages, but betrayal only has 2. The paralyzing shock of the strike and the cold, absolute clarity of the aftermath. I skipped the denial entirely. The evidence was glowing in my hands, illuminating the dark, humiliating corners of my marriage where I had allowed myself to be kept blind. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone across the terminal. Instead, I looked up at the departures board. My flight to JFK was boarding in 20 minutes. Mark's flight, the fictional one to Heathrow, had supposedly already departed. In reality, he was likely sitting in a VIP lounge on the other side of the airport, sipping champagne and waiting for Chloe's arrival from Athens. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had neatly packaged his naive architect wife onto a transatlantic flight so he could finalize his financial coup and enjoy a romantic getaway with his pregnant mistress. He had calculated every variable, except for the clumsiness of his own arrogance. I opened my laptop bag, pulled out a charging cable, and plugged the black iPhone into my portable power bank. I wasn't going to confront him in the airport. If I showed my hand now, he would immediately call his lawyers, freeze our joint accounts, and accelerate the offshore transfer. I needed time. I needed the one thing he thought he had stolen from me, a head start. I connected the burner phone to my laptop and began airdropping every single photograph, every PDF attachment, every WhatsApp thread, and every email into a secure encrypted folder on my hard drive. I watched the progress bar inch across my screen, a digital download of my own devastation. When the final file transferred, I turned the burner phone entirely off to prevent Mark from remotely wiping it through iCloud. He would just assume it was lost in the chaotic shuffle of international travel. Final boarding call for Flight 482 to New York JFK. The overhead speaker crackled. I zipped my laptop into my bag, picked up my boarding pass, and walked toward the gate. I didn't board that plane as the heartbroken, discarded wife Mark Vance thought he had created. I boarded as the architect who was about to systematically dismantle the building she had designed. The flight took 12 hours. For 12 hours, suspended 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, I didn't sleep a single minute. The cabin was dark, filled with the soft hum of the engines and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping passengers. I sat in the glow of my screen, reading the autopsy of my 7-year marriage. The depth of Mark's deception was breathtaking. It wasn't just a physical affair, it was a highly coordinated financial assassination. Through his encrypted email app, I found the communications with a boutique wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands. Mark was setting up a shell corporation named Aegis Holdings Limited. The plan was painfully simple. He was using the upcoming merger as a smokescreen to liquidate my 50% equity in Vance Innovations, transfer the capital offshore, and declare the stateside company virtually bankrupt. He had even forged my signature on a preliminary spousal waiver form. I stared at the PDF, my eyes tracing the loops of my own name, executed with terrifying precision. He had been practicing my signature. But the offshore accounts weren't the discovery that finally made me break down in the tiny airplane lavatory. That honor belonged to a text thread I found between Mark and a number saved simply as E. Eleanor, my mother-in-law. I scrolled through their messages, the bile rising in my throat. Eleanor hadn't just known about Chloe. She had actively facilitated the affair. She had hosted Chloe for afternoon tea at her Connecticut estate, while I was in the city managing the contractors for Mark's new office build. Eleanor, make sure the Chelsea condo is placed directly into the trust, Mark. We don't want Clara getting her hands on that property when the divorce is filed. Chloe needs a proper nursery for my grandson. Have you dealt with Clara yet? Mark, handling it next week, sending her back to NY from Greece early so I can finish the paperwork. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's too busy planning our loft renovation, lol. Eleanor, good. She was useful for the seed money, but she simply lacks the pedigree for where you are going, darling. Hurry home. Useful for the seed money. Lacks the pedigree. I locked myself in the airplane bathroom, gripped the edges of the stainless steel sink, and let out a fractured, silent sob. My chest heaved as 7 years of subtle insults, passive-aggressive Thanksgiving dinners, and isolating loneliness crashed over me. I had tried so hard to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I had bought Eleanor vintage brooches for her birthdays. I had sat through her agonizing lectures on etiquette. I had emptied my grandfather's trust fund to save her family's tarnished name. They hadn't just used me. They had mocked me while doing it. I washed my face with freezing cold water. I looked at my reflection in the harsh fluorescent mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, the skin underneath them bruised with exhaustion. I took a deep breath, and I let the grief go. I let it wash down the drain. What replaced it was a rage so pure, so mathematically cold, it felt like adrenaline. When I landed at JFK, a heavy September rain was washing over the tarmac. I took a black car back to our Tribeca loft. The space was enormous, minimalist, and suffocating. Every piece of furniture, every lighting fixture, I had chosen. It was a monument to a life that didn't actually exist. It was Monday evening. According to Mark's emails to his offshore attorney, the final transfer of funds into the Cayman account was scheduled to be executed on Thursday at 5 p.m. EST. I had exactly 72 hours to stop a $90 million heist. I dropped my suitcase by the door and walked straight down the long oak-paneled hallway to Mark's home office. The heavy walnut door was locked. He always kept it locked. Client confidentiality, he used to tell me, kissing my cheek as he turned the key. But Mark was a creature of habit, and arrogant men rarely change their routines. I went to the kitchen, opened the false bottom of the antique tea tin on the top shelf, and pulled out the spare brass key he thought I didn't know about. I unlocked the office door and stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and expensive scotch. Behind his massive mahogany desk sat a steel wall safe, hidden behind a framed architectural sketch of our first building, a sketch I had drawn. I swung the frame aside. I needed his physical banking ledgers, the USB hardware keys for his crypto accounts, and the original articles of incorporation for Vance Innovations. If I was going to freeze his assets, I needed the physical proof to back up the digital files from the burner phone. Before I could touch the keypad on the safe, my personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mark, calling from his primary, official phone. I stood in the center of his dark office, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I cleared my throat, forced my facial muscles into a relaxed, oblivious smile even though he couldn't see me, and answered the phone. "Hi, honey," I said, my voice dripping with the perfect pitch of a devoted wife. "Clara, baby," Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. He sounded remarkably relaxed for a man supposedly in the middle of a corporate crisis. "Did you land okay? I've been so worried." "Just got to the loft," I said, walking over to his desk. "I'm exhausted. How is London? Is the deal salvageable?" "It's a nightmare," he sighed, the theatrical exhaustion in his tone almost Oscar-worthy. "It's pouring rain here, typical London weather. I've been locked in a boardroom with the lawyers for 6 hours. I think I can save it, but it's going to take me a few days. I feel terrible for ruining our trip." I listened closely. Beneath the sound of his breathing, I could hear a faint, rhythmic sound in the background. It wasn't the muffled echo of a London boardroom. It was the distinct, undeniable sound of ocean waves crashing against rocks, followed by the faint hum of a Vespa engine. He was standing on the terrace of the Santorini villa. "I know you're doing your best, Mark," I said, tracing the edge of his mahogany desk with my fingernail. "Just focus on the business. Don't worry about me. I have plenty to keep me occupied here. You're the best, Clara. Seriously. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," I replied smoothly. "Oh, before I let you go, did you lose something on your way to the airport? A secondary phone, maybe?" There was a microsecond of silence on the line, the kind of silence that happens right after a pin is pulled from a grenade. "A secondary phone," Mark laughed, though the sound was slightly hollow, forced. "No, baby. Why would you ask that? Just checking. I thought I saw you drop something at the cafe. Must have been someone else's." "Yeah, must have been. I have to get back to the partners, Clara. I love you." "Love you too, Mark." I hung up. He was spooked, but he was too arrogant to believe I knew anything. He would assume he simply misplaced the burner, and since I hadn't confronted him, he would believe his secrets were still safe in the dark. I turned back to the steel wall safe. I punched in his mother's birthday. Incorrect. I punched in the date of his company's founding. Incorrect. I stood there for a moment, thinking about the psychology of the man I married. A man who forged my signature. A man who viewed me only as the seed money for his greatness. I typed in the exact dollar amount of the trust fund I had given him 7 years ago. 3500000. The heavy steel bolts clicked, and the safe door swung open. Inside sat a stack of blue leather-bound ledgers, 2 encrypted hard drives, and a thick manila envelope labeled Chelsea Property Deed. I pulled the envelope out, unwound the red string, and looked at the documents inside. It was the deed to Chloe's luxury condo, paid for entirely in cash from the Vance Innovations corporate account. He had embezzled company funds to buy his mistress a home. I stacked everything into my tote bag. The digital evidence was damning, but the physical embezzlement trail was a silver bullet. It was 9 p.m. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't need a marriage counselor. I didn't need to cry to my mother. I needed an apex predator. I typed a name into my search bar, Diana Rossi. Diana Rossi wasn't just a divorce attorney. She was the grim reaper of Manhattan high society marriages. She was a former forensic accountant turned litigator who specialized in dismantling men who hid assets offshore. 3 years ago, at a charity dinner, Mark had pointed Diana out to me across the room. She was wearing a blood-red blazer, sipping a martini, and making a hedge fund manager sweat through his tuxedo. "Stay away from that woman," Mark had warned me with a sneer. "She's a viper. She destroys good men for sport." I picked up my phone and dialed the emergency after-hours number listed on her firm's website. It rang twice before a sharp, no-nonsense voice answered. "Rossi." "Miss Rossi," I said, my voice steady, echoing slightly in the empty cavern of the Tribeca loft. "My name is Clara Vance. My husband is Mark Vance, CEO of Vance Innovations. He is currently in Greece with his pregnant mistress, attempting to liquidate $90 million of our joint assets into a Cayman Islands shell company by Thursday at 5 o'clock. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I heard the sound of a pen clicking. "And how exactly do you know this, Mrs. Vance?" Diana asked, her tone shifting from irritated to intensely curious. "Because I have his burner phone, his physical ledgers, and proof of corporate embezzlement," I replied. "And I want to burn his empire to the ground." Diana Rossi let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Be at my office tomorrow at 7 a.m., she said. "Bring everything." "And Mrs. Vance?" "Yes? Don't transfer a single dime yet. We don't just want to burn his empire. We want to own the ashes." Diana Rossi's office sat on the 48th floor of a glass skyscraper in Midtown, an immaculate space of white marble and black steel that felt less like a law firm and more like a war room. When I walked in at 7 a.m. on Tuesday, she was already sitting behind her massive desk, a cup of black coffee steaming beside a stack of legal pads. She was in her early 50s, wearing a pristine navy suit, her eyes sharp and assessing as she watched me drop my heavy tote bag onto her desk. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days, Clara," Diana said, not as an insult, but as an observation. "I can sleep when the money is safe," I replied, pulling out the burner phone, the blue ledgers, the hard drives, and the manila envelope containing the Chelsea condo deed. For the next 4 hours, Diana and a team of 3 forensic accountants tore through the evidence. I sat on a white leather sofa, nursing an espresso, watching them work. The atmosphere in the room shifted from professional curiosity to predatory silence as they mapped out the sheer audacity of Mark's financial crimes. "This is remarkably stupid," Diana finally said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "He's using corporate accounts to fund personal real estate, forging spousal waivers to bypass SEC regulations on executive equity transfers, and attempting to wire funds to a Cayman shell company that is clearly tied to his personal social security number. The arrogance is almost offensive. He thought I was too stupid to understand the architecture of the business," I said quietly. "He forgot that I'm the one who actually designed it." Diana smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "Here is the reality of your situation, Clara. If we just file for divorce today, Mark's attorneys will stall. He will claim the Cayman transfer is a legitimate corporate restructuring, and you will spend the next 5 years fighting for scraps in court. We are not going to do that. What are we going to do? We are going to execute an ex parte asset freeze," Diana said, leaning forward, her eyes locked onto mine. "Because he forged your signature on the corporate equity waiver, we can file an emergency injunction for fraud, but we have to wait until he initiates the wire transfer on Thursday. If we strike now, he pulls back. If we strike the moment the wire hits the clearinghouse, we freeze the funds in transit. He loses access to his American accounts. The Cayman account sits empty, and he is financially paralyzed." I felt a cold thrill race down my spine. "And what about the company, Vance Innovations?" "You provided the $350,000 seed money," Diana pointed out, tapping a file folder. "Under New York state law, and given the lack of a prenuptial agreement, that makes the intellectual property and the foundational valuation a marital asset. He's trying to steal your company, Clara. So, we are going to let him dig his own grave, and then we are going to push him in. The plan was set. We had 48 hours until the trap snapped shut. Tuesday night, I sat in the loft, the silence heavy and oppressive. Mark texted me photos of a rainy London street, clearly pulled from Google Images with captions complaining about the dreadful English food. I replied with heart emojis and told him I was spending the evening curating new paint swatches for the guest bedroom. Mark, you have such a great eye, babe. Can't wait to see what you pick. Love you. I stared at the text. He was sitting in the Santorini villa with Chloe, likely drinking the same Acertico wine we had ordered 3 days ago, plotting my financial ruin while complimenting my interior design skills. The level of sociopathy required to maintain that facade was staggering. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything but a deep, driving need to see him lose. Wednesday morning, I executed the second phase of my plan. I needed to deal with Eleanor. I dressed carefully, a cashmere sweater, tailored trousers, my grandmother's pearl earrings. I looked exactly like the compliant, subservient daughter-in-law Eleanor expected me to be. I took a car service out to her sprawling, ivy-covered estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. When I arrived, Eleanor was in the conservatory, clipping orchids. She wore a tweed skirt and looked at me with her usual expression of mild disappointment. "Clara, I wasn't expecting you," she said, not setting down her shears. "Mark told me he was delayed in London. Shouldn't you be at the loft preparing for his return?" "I wanted to surprise you, Eleanor," I said, my voice soft, submissive. "I know how much you love the artisan pastries from that bakery in Soho, so I brought some." I set a white pastry box on the wrought iron patio table. Eleanor sighed, finally turning to face me. "That's very thoughtful, Clara. Though you really should watch your spending. Mark works so terribly hard to provide for you. It's a heavy burden for a man to carry his family's legacy entirely on his own shoulders." I walked over to the table, my hands clasped in front of me. "You're right, Eleanor. Mark carries so much. I just wanted to make sure everything was in order. I've been looking over some of the finances, just trying to be helpful." Eleanor stiffened, her eyes narrowed. "Finances? Clara, darling, you don't have the head for that. Mark handles the business. You handle the home. It's a perfectly functional arrangement." "I know," I said, feigning confusion. "It's just, I found some paperwork on Mark's desk about a property in Chelsea and a trust fund being set up for a baby. I was just so confused. Is Mark investing in residential real estate now?" The color drained entirely from Eleanor's face. She dropped the gardening shears. They hit the stone floor with a sharp, metallic clang. "Where did you see that?" she demanded, her voice losing its aristocratic lilt, dropping into a harsh, panicked rasp. "Oh, just on his desk," I said innocently, taking a step closer to her. "And then I saw the text messages on the black phone he left at the airport. The messages between you and him, about Chloe and the baby." The silence in the conservatory was absolute. The air felt thick, charged with sudden, violent electricity. Eleanor stared at me, the mask of the refined matriarch shattering into pieces. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to manipulate, but I didn't give her the chance. My voice dropped the submissive act. It turned into steel. "I know everything, Eleanor," I said, stepping into her personal space, forcing her to look me in the eye. "I know about the Cayman accounts. I know about the forgery. I know you hosted his mistress in this very house while I was building his empire." Eleanor stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. "Clara, you don't understand. Mark is a Vance. He needs an heir. He needs a woman who can elevate him, not just a draftswoman who got lucky with an inheritance. We were protecting the family." "You have no family," I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You have a bankrupt name and a son who is about to go to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, though her hands were shaking. "If you try to ruin him, I will destroy your reputation in this city. You will be nothing." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a manila envelope. I tossed it onto the patio table next to the pastry box. "That is a copy of the deed to the Chelsea condo, bought with embezzled corporate funds," I said. "And attached to it is the IRS reporting form for the offshore tax evasion scheme you advised him to execute. My lawyer is filing the fraud injunction tomorrow. I just came here to look you in the eye before everything you value burns to the ground." Eleanor stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She looked back up at me, terrified, realizing for the first time that the quiet, obedient girl she had bullied for 7 years was holding the executioner's axe. "Enjoy the pastries, Eleanor," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the conservatory. I didn't look back. Thursday, the day of the wire transfer. I arrived at Diana Rossi's office at 3 p.m. The war room was primed. Diana sat at the head of the conference table, her laptop open, connected directly to a contact at the Federal Banking Clearinghouse. A junior associate sat next to her, ready to file the emergency ex parte injunction the exact second the wire was initiated. "He's in the window," Diana said, checking her watch. "The European markets are closing. He'll initiate the transfer before 5 p.m. EST to ensure it clears the offshore intermediary." I sat at the opposite end of the table, my hands resting flat on the cool mahogany. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drum in my ears. This was the culmination of 7 years of gaslighting, of being told I wasn't enough, of being erased from my own achievements. At 4:12 p.m., Diana's laptop pinged. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the screen. A feral, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Got him," Diana whispered. "He just initiated a $92 million wire transfer from the Vance Innovations primary corporate account to Aegis Holdings Limited in the Cayman Islands." "File it," I said. My voice didn't shake. The junior associate hit a button on his keyboard. "Emergency injunction filed with the Southern District Court, serving the bank now." It took exactly 14 minutes for the trap to snap shut. At 4:26 p.m., the clearinghouse flagged the transaction based on the federal injunction. The $92 million didn't arrive in the Cayman Islands. It didn't return to Mark's corporate account. It was frozen in transit, locked in a digital purgatory that Mark could not access. Furthermore, the injunction triggered an automatic freeze on all domestic accounts associated with Mark's social security number, his personal checking, his corporate expense accounts, his credit cards. Everything went to zero. "Checkmate," Diana said, closing her laptop with a satisfying snap. I looked at the burner phone sitting on the table in front of me. I turned it on. For 3 days, I had kept it dead, letting Mark believe his secrets were safe. Now, I watched the screen light up. It connected to the cellular network, and immediately, notifications began pouring in. But I wasn't interested in the burner phone anymore. I picked up my primary cell phone and waited. At 4:45 p.m., my phone began to ring. It was Mark, calling from his real phone. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the sound, before I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly calm. Clara, are you there?" Mark's voice was frantic, breathless, bordering on hysterical. The polished, arrogant CEO was gone. He sounded like a man drowning. "I'm here, Mark. Is everything okay? You sound stressed. Is it the London merger?" "Clara, listen to me very carefully," he gasped. "Something is wrong with the bank. My cards are declining. The corporate accounts are locked. I called the wealth manager, and he said there's a federal injunction on my accounts. Do you know anything about this? Did someone from the board contact you?" "A federal injunction?" I asked, feigning shock. "Mark, that sounds serious. Why would there be an injunction?" "I don't know," he shouted, the panic bleeding into rage. "Someone filed an emergency hold. The hotel here is demanding a new card, and I don't have access to any capital. You need to call the New York branch right now and authorize a release from the joint savings." I leaned back in my chair, looking across the conference table at Diana. She was smirking. "I can't do that, Mark," I said softly. "What do you mean you can't do that?" "Clara, this is an emergency. Do it." "I can't do it, Mark, because I'm the one who filed the injunction." The silence on the line was profound. It was the silence of a man realizing he had just stepped on a landmine, and he could hear the click under his boot. "What?" he finally whispered, his voice trembling. "I know about Chloe," I said, my voice dropping the facade, becoming cold, precise, and absolute. "I know about the baby. I know about the Cayman Shell Company. I know you forged my signature on the spousal waiver. And I know you're not in London, Mark. You're in Santorini." Clara, wait, let me explain." "There is nothing to explain." I cut him off. "You left your burner phone on the sugar counter at the airport. A barista handed it to me 20 minutes after you walked away. I have everything, Mark. I have the ledgers. I have the deed to the Chelsea condo you bought with embezzled funds. And as of 14 minutes ago, you have exactly $0 to your name." "You insane bitch," he screamed, the mask entirely gone now, his true venomous nature roaring through the speaker. "I built that company. I am Vance Innovations. You are nothing without me." "No, Mark," I replied quietly. "You are Vance Innovations, but I am the architect, and I just demolished the building. Enjoy Santorini. You're going to be there for a while. Considering you can't pay your hotel bill or buy a flight home, my lawyer will be in touch." I hung up the phone. I blocked his number. I sat in the quiet conference room, the Manhattan skyline stretching out behind me in the golden afternoon light. My hands weren't shaking. My chest didn't ache. For the first time in 7 years, I could breathe. The fallout was spectacular, a masterclass in swift, merciless corporate dismantling. Diana Rossi didn't just file for divorce. She filed a civil suit for corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and embezzlement. Because Vance Innovations was technically a private entity seeded entirely by my marital assets, and because Mark had committed a felony by forging my signature on the SEC waiver, the board of directors panicked. They didn't want a federal investigation tearing through their valuation right before an IPO. They wanted Mark gone. On Friday morning, less than 24 hours after the wire freeze, the board held an emergency meeting. Mark dialed in from the lobby of the Santorini villa, reportedly shouting at the partners, demanding they release emergency funds. Instead, they fired him. They stripped him of his CEO title, voided his golden parachute clause under the morals and criminal conduct provision of his contract, and severed all ties with him. By Friday afternoon, Mark Vance was officially unemployed, completely broke, and stranded in Greece with a pregnant mistress who suddenly realized her billionaire boyfriend was a fraud. The details of their implosion trickled back to me over the next week through Diana's investigators. When Mark's credit cards declined for the $3,500 a night villa, the hotel management locked them out of their suite. Chloe, furious and terrified, abandoned him. She managed to buy a coach ticket back to New York using her own credit card, leaving Mark screaming at the front desk. He eventually had to call his mother, Eleanor, begging her to wire him the money for a commercial flight home. But Eleanor's accounts were also under scrutiny. The IRS had been tipped off regarding her involvement in the offshore tax evasion scheme. She had to liquidate a portion of her antique jewelry collection just to get her son back to the United States. But the true victory wasn't watching Mark lose. It was watching myself win. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. The settlement was a bloodbath. Because of the overwhelming evidence of fraud and embezzlement, the judge awarded me 100% of the Tribeca loft, full reimbursement for the embezzled funds used to buy the Chelsea condo, and a 60% controlling equity stake in Vance Innovations. Mark got nothing. He avoided federal prison only because he agreed to forfeit his remaining shares to the board in exchange for them dropping the corporate embezzlement charges. He moved into the carriage house of Eleanor's Greenwich estate, a disgraced exile in his own family's home, facing a mountain of legal debt. I didn't keep Vance Innovations. I had no desire to run a company built on a lie. I forced a buyout of my 60% stake, walking away with a settlement that dwarfed the original $350,000 I had foolishly handed to Mark 7 years ago. I sold the Tribeca loft. It was too big, too cold, and too full of ghosts. I bought a sunlit, 2-bedroom apartment in the West Village, a place with exposed brick, high ceilings, and an enormous drafting table by the window. I started my own architectural firm. I didn't use the Vance name. I used my maiden name, Clara Hayes. I specialized in sustainable commercial design, the exact kind of work Mark had told me I wasn't seasoned enough to lead. Within my first year, I secured 3 major contracts, including a redesign of a massive tech hub in Brooklyn. I was sitting at my drafting table on a Tuesday evening in November. The city outside was dusted with the first snow of the season, the streetlights glowing amber against the falling flakes. I was sketching the facade of a new building, my pencil moving with a fluid, confident grace that I hadn't felt in nearly a decade. My phone buzzed on the desk, an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, "Hello?" "Clara," a voice rasped. It was Mark. He sounded older, defeated, stripped of the booming arrogance that had once defined him. I didn't hang up immediately. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to sit in it. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice cool, detached. I wanted to hear your voice," he stammered. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. I lost everything. Chloe left me. My mother won't even look at me. I'm working as a mid-level consultant for a firm in Stamford. I'm nothing." "You're not nothing, Mark," I said softly, staring out the window at the snow. "You're exactly what you always were. You just don't have me to hide behind anymore. Clara, please. I know I messed up, but we built something great together once. We could." "We didn't build anything," I interrupted, my tone final and absolute. "I built it. You just lived in it. And then you tried to burn it down with me inside." "Clara, don't call this number again, Mark. I have buildings to design. I ended the call and blocked the number. I set my phone face down on the desk, picked up my pencil, and went back to work. The lines on the paper were clean, precise, and entirely my own. If you are listening to this, and you feel like you are disappearing inside someone else's life, someone else's ambition, someone else's lies, I need you to know that the blueprint of your life belongs to you. You are not just the foundation for someone else's empire. You are the architect. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is tear down the structure that is crushing you, gather the bricks from the wreckage, and build something new. It will be terrifying. It will be painful. But when the dust settles, the view from the top will be entirely your own, and no one can ever take that away from you.